Well, good morning. Wow, wouldn't it be great if, like in the movies, when danger was close, you'd get a clear indication like that. Birds would stop chirping, monkeys would run away. I'm going to do something a little bit different than I usually do today. And I want to talk to you about some lessons. Bill took you on a Formula One ride and to the pitch in football. I'm going to take you back to nature. And I want to thank, first of all, the opportunity to present this. The concepts that we operate under are not so different in many cases. I live in the mountains in Colorado Springs on the north side of Pikes Peak up at 10,000 feet. And just 2 days ago, I saw one of these in my backyard trying to get a taste of my Irish wolfhound. Nature's pretty much tooth and claw. And as we go through this, I'll tell you, I will pull no punches with it. And as we begin to look at how we as human beings operate as part of the natural world, it's very much fang and claw there as well when things begin to go wrong. So we'll start with this one. It's not Throwback Thursday on Facebook, but this is a young Tony Kern, circa 1960. In Michigan, and that's my one of 3 pet deer that I had growing up. My father was a game warden, and I was a very deprived child. I had no video games. We were too far away to play Little League, so I grew up with a .22 rifle, a fishing pole, and a bicycle, and hundreds of thousands of acres behind me. And occasionally, this particular deer, as well as several other animals that I had growing up, like the Boy Scouts picked Bambi up. That's Bambi. We also had Queenie and a couple other ones. Picked her up when she was like 7 hours old, and then the mother abandoned her because it had human smell on her. So we raised her. She's 2 here. I am 6. And that's White Lake Township in Michigan. Raised several other animals as well. She actually went back into the forest after she was 3, and the following year brought back 2 of her fawns. To the house to visit us. She wouldn't let the fawns get close to us, but she came back and would still feed out of a bottle. But so I had deer. Let's see, had raccoons, had a bear, a black bear that grew to be about 250 pounds before he went back in the woods, and foxes, just a whole host of different things. Out of all those, what do you think the toughest one was to domesticate? Obviously not the deer, right? She's doing pretty well. Fox, maybe? Raccoon? Right there. They're just devious little bastards. I mean, look at them. God made them look like a criminal. They're nocturnal. They're sneaky. Kind of like a maintenance supervisor. See, there's a lot. Thank you. Thank you. They can open doors. They're just sort of amazing. The natural world's very, very important to me. I spent half my life in the woods, and I'd spend all of it there if I could pay the rent doing it. It is something that you don't have to live on the north slope of Pikes Peak at 10,000 feet down 4.5 miles of dirt roads to appreciate. You can appreciate the lessons of nature anywhere you're at. Walk outside here, and I saw a few ants running around down by the end of the walkway here yesterday, and I took a couple lessons from them and actually inserted some things in the presentation. Because it's so causal. And when you look at some of the things from nature, it's so illustrative. But yet we walk around and sort of take it for granted because we feel ourselves to be empowered to have dominion over it. Nothing could be further from the truth. We are part of nature, and as part of nature, we're bound by the same rules. Bound by the same rules. What are those rules? Awareness and adaptability equals survival. That's true for the raccoons, it's true for the ants, it's true for the jellyfish, and it's true for you and me. And further, it applies in real time. It applies to us as individuals. It applies to transformational technologies. It applies to us in teams. And it applies to us in organizational cultures. All of these things require us to sense change, respond appropriately, and adapt. There are significant implications, not just for safety, but for operational effectiveness, profitability, all of those things. So I want to share a few of those insights with you here today. So let's start out by asking ourselves, we throw around a lot of words, professionalism, airmanship, excellence, awareness. We're all here, you're listening, you're aware, right? Some types of awareness are easy. That which comes in through our five senses, we tend to take in. But at the end of the day, this idea to intuit what's happening with enough time then to react and respond appropriately with our training, with our technology, and with our teams is what we want to do. So let's just take a look at one of my Blue Threat proverbs. And I always hate it when people pitch their books, so I won't tell you that this comes out of the back chapter of Blue Threat, which is available for $19.95 at Amazon.com. But when we talk about SA, I like to say SA squared, because you show me somebody who's lost situational awareness, and I will show you someone who first lost self-awareness. They lost track of what they were thinking about. So what can we do to change that? What can we do to, and especially with all the technologies, and sometimes this technology comes at us really fast and hard, but more often we have these long, boring periods where we've turned over a lot of our decision-making to the machines, right? Which really means we turned it over to the software engineers, which is terrifying. So there's a concept called attention steering that I like to talk about and that we teach. It's pretty simple. It's the ability to self-monitor what you're thinking about to heighten your self-awareness and therefore your situational awareness. What am I thinking about? What should I be thinking about? Am I daydreaming up here? Am I focused? Am I worried about something at home? Am I worried about something going on in the cockpit? Am I worried about my customers? Am I worried about my job? Where is my attention focused? Where should it be focused? Now, there's a lot more to attention steering than this. There's things called memory flags and all sorts of stuff, but we're not going to go deeply into that here because of time constraints. What I'd like to do now is show you, it's about a 4-minute video. Many of you have seen it. It was taken by at Kruger National Park. And I'll let it play, and then we'll come back and talk about it a little bit. Go ahead.
That is a huge buffalo.
That's a huge buffalo.
It's a huge buffalo.
I don't know, I think they're a bit young. I don't know, maybe. They're getting ready.
They're crouching.
She's quite big.
Does that mean attack position? Yeah, it's attack position. Where's that female? I can't see it.
It'll keep playing.
Oh my God.
Can we grab the baby?
Oh my God.
I'll grab the baby,
She's
watch.
going for him. She's going for him. She got him. Oh, she did. She got him.
Baby, he's gone, he's just plucked up. Oh my God. Unbelievable.
Drag him out. They're dragging him out.
Hulle het nou net 'n kleintjie gevang. Hier's lekker action hier so, jong. Hulle het 'n kleintjie hier so in die water en die krop is besig om nader te kom.
It's on its back. I hope they kill it quickly. Oh, it's still alive.
Ja, positief. Hulle het 'n klein buffeltjie gevang hier so.
There's a crocodile there too.
Ja, daar's 'n krokodil ook. Daar gryp 'n krokodil ook die kleintjie. Yes.
Crocodile. Coming out through the
Check through the barn. There's a cock's trying to grab the baby.
Yes.
Look at this. The crocodile's taking the baby away.
Oh my God. They're two crocodiles.
They're going to lose it.
Oh my God.
Oh, they're going to fight over it.
Jeez, I'm shaking.
Oh my God.
Oh, he's coming for help.
Oh, look at those.
The lions are... Oh, no, they're going to come and try and chase the lion, but I think they're too late.
I think you're right. For real.
En hierdie jatties wil die leeu's net bykom. Hulle jag die leeu's links en regs.
Ooh, they got him surrounded.
Ja, jy kan maar kom, jong. Hier's
And that one's
Ooh!
big one.
Chasing it.
Will it go in the water?
You got the lion on him, run.
That little bucko is still alive.
Brave king of the beast.
The others are doing those. They're getting them at the other end.
Yes. Can you believe this?
Never seen that.
I've never seen anything like
The
that.
calf's still alive.
It is?
Yeah, it's trying to get away. It's standing up.
It is. It's still alive.
Oh, they're pushing them into the water.
It's standing up. It's
It's
standing
standing
up.
up. It's running away.
And
Oh,
it's
they've got
He's
it back.
gone.
It's got it back.
They've got him back. They do have him back.
It's hot.
I've never seen anything like that.
Look, nice running. Look at them running.
There's two left.
Gee, they chased him away.
But they hooked the one. Did you see they hooked the one?
Dude, they hooked the one.
They got the other one.
Go on, Buffalo, go on. And there's another one.
Who says Hollywood makes the best movies, huh?
Look at this big bull.
Isn't that something? Yeah, it's really something. You know, I don't show you that just to say, you know, nature's fang and claw, but there's a couple lessons there. First of all, don't mess with Mother Nature, right? If there's a bunch of lions sitting there crouching in attack mode, it's one thing to get a couple of big bulls to go out there and say, hey, you're a little bit too close. But what did they do wrong there? Took a young one into danger, right? Took a young one into danger. We're going to come back to that in just a minute because our industry is about to undergo this incredible crew change from folks, men of a certain age, women of a certain age, to over, what by Boeing estimates, 500,000 in the next year coming into our industry that currently are in high school or trade school or college. What about that crocodile? Pretty tough to see there. I mean, he was actually there for about 30 seconds before somebody noticed him. Many things that are risky in our industry are camouflaged, okay? But they're not invisible. They're not invisible. We can learn to see the camouflaged risk. We have to train ourselves a little bit differently. In aviation, what risk do you think is the most camouflaged? And it shouldn't be, because all statistics tell us that it is the number one risk that we face every day. It's the human element, right? I mean, depending on whose statistics you read, what reports you study, we're still somewhere between 60 and 80% human error. I think the camouflage is our ego. How many of you here have died in a human error crash? So obviously it's not a problem for you. Right? Me neither, but I've been pretty damn close a couple of times. And let me ask this a different way. How many of you have had a very, very close call where you had to perform near perfectly just to survive? Yeah. The lions are around, the crocodiles are around, and sometimes we are that lion, that crocodile. And I like to refer to this as the blue threat. The blue threat is the internal threat. And if we look at some of the programs we've got going out there, like threat and air management, we're told that the risk is external. And we have these wonderful layers of Swiss cheese, which always bothers me because why didn't we make them out of Kevlar without holes? You know, I never quite figured out Jim's thinking on that. And we get this, you know, you've seen, it's almost illegal in any English-speaking nation to do a safety presentation without a Swiss cheese model, but I'm going to violate that today. But I'm going to talk about it a little bit. We see that arrow coming down and the holes line up in the Swiss cheese, and that poor flight crew is struck because the system fails. Okay? But if you look at NTSB databases, and there's been several studies on this as well, in more than half the cases, the individual's ego, judgment, decision-making decides today, I really don't need that SOP. I'm going to substitute my experience and judgment for your Swiss cheese. So if that happens more than half the time, SOP violations resulting in a cascading chain of events, error chain, accident chain, where is the risk? The risk is simple, it's internal, at least the majority of it. There's lots of external risks, don't get me wrong. There's weather, there's mountains, there's all sorts of stuff. We have two choices. We can see that risk, recognize it in ourselves, admit it, and deal with it, or we can say, hasn't hurt me yet. Or we can say, well, that's old Joe. Joe's got more time in the helicopter than you do alive, and he's got really, really sound judgment. Been flying accident-free for 20 years, and therefore, we're going to give him a little more slack. Blue threat typically responsible for about 4 times more negative outcomes than the red threat. And that's true not just in accident investigation, by the way. It's true in executive derailment. It's true in customer service problems. It really transcends all aspects of your organization: safety, quality, efficiency, productivity. Look at this picture. Notice where everybody's eyes are except one. Now, this is a big game animal in Africa. A lot of people shoot at them. The last time somebody pointed a long object at them with an optic on it, what do you think it might have been? Who doesn't know that yet? That little one, right? So as we begin to look at how we're going to onboard this next generation, and some of you are in the room already. I talked to several youngsters last night coming into the industry. They're bright, they're eager, they're enthusiastic, everything we're not anymore, right? They got all that going for them. But they really need a culture for which to come into, a culture of compliance, right? So if we bring in that young, idealistic man or woman, and we sit them in the cockpit or we put them on the maintenance hangar with old Joe, who decides that his ego and judgment trumps your SOPs, what are we going to do? We're going to transfer a culture of non-compliance into people without the wisdom that old Joe has. I guess it was 2010 I spoke at the professionalism conference that the National Transportation Safety Board put on in Washington, D.C. And I predicted, and I will hold to this, that if we don't fix those cultural compliance aspects of our organizations, you're going to see the mishap rate caused by human error increase by 400% over the next decade. Right? I can see that coming as clearly as the housing bubble bust, because you've got all these people coming in that don't have the experience levels of our seasoned veterans, and our seasoned veterans have somehow managed to immunize themselves a little bit with their judgment and experience, and so they know what rules they can break and when. Their risk management skills are pretty good, and now we're going to hand that over to people without that same judgment and wisdom. We have to fix it. We have to fix it now. So there's safety in numbers, especially for the young and inexperienced. We have to surround them with that culture of compliance. We have to build that. we've started a program to try to build that culture. We're working with universities and some others called Generations in Aviation to find the right mentors, okay, and the right proteges and match them up. If Boeing's right, we're looking at 500,000 people coming into our industry in the next 10 years, 20 years, I guess. We need to make sure we onboard them correctly. Good photograph. Say this is from Wyoming. Mule deer. One of the things that we have to keep in mind is that if we want numbers to work in our favor, we have to stick together. This one obviously got weeded out from the crowd. It's interesting when you look at deer, elk, and buffalo and their predation. They operate differently. Deer and elk scatter. Buffalo herd. Buffalo tend to survive much greater attacks of predation than deer and elk. Simple, really. If we stick together, we do this as a team, we ought to be able to bring these folks on board, and we ought to bring them on board successfully. Isn't that why we invented CRM in the first place? CRM's kind of fallen from favor. It's not quite as trendy. We've put it through 5 or 6 generations. We rename it. We do lots of other things. But I don't think it's ever been more important. There's a lot of stuff going on. A lot of single pilot operations, a lot of high-risk missions, a whole bunch of 2-captain crews. There's this weird thing out there, especially in corporate aviation, where type rating equals captain. You know? So everybody's a captain. People swap seats left and right, and they forget things like leaving a cup of coffee on the wing or sometimes putting the landing gear down. This kind of training that was originally formed in the late 1970s, kind of in response to the whole glut of World War II captains that were very, dare we say, arrogant, authoritative. That whole authority gradient was, I remember when I first started flying, this was 1980, 2 hands ahead and a heartbeat, Ronald Reagan said you can fly our Air Force airplanes. And my first aircraft commander was a guy named Dick Poteet from the Tennessee Air National Guard. I was flying KC-135s back then. I eventually grew up and got a real airplane. But Dick said, you see this line down the middle of the cockpit? Everything on the left-hand side is mine. Everything on the right-hand side is also mine. Okay? You don't touch a damn thing until I trust you. Till I trust you. You had to prove your mettle. Okay? The one thing he had me do, and this tells you how long ago it was right after the gear and the flaps came up and we hit departure speed, he made me light his cigar. And you know what? That was really good training for me because I had to build that trust. It wasn't assumed. I had to demonstrate it. And we debriefed like crazy to the point where we got better and better and better. And I trust Major Poteet created the aviator out of me that I could be. My God-given potential was developed because I had that kind of mentorship. I was lucky. Other people didn't have that kind of mentorship, many of whom I've buried. Automation. We're not going to touch too much on it here, but it's definitely the silent crew member, right? Perfectly logical. It's like Spock, but he doesn't talk. Right? And so we're working on all sorts of technologies now to require the human to be more in the loop. That's not a technology thing. That's a human thing. That's an awareness plus adaptability equals survival thing. And that's why I chose to do this a little bit differently, to remind us about those fundamental issues. Aw, look at that. What a cute little thing. Risk doesn't always look scary. In fact, sometimes it looks darn right cute and exciting. Sometimes we got to get hurt a little bit in order to recognize the risk. Unfortunately, and anybody ever had to pull quills out of a dog? It's not fun, is it? You know how much it would cost if you go to a vet and they pull it out? About $400 or $500. I had to do that once, and I said, I got a pair of pliers, man. So how are we going to bring these guys on board? First of all, we got to realize a couple things about them. One is they communicate a lot differently than we do, right? It never, and it's sort of infecting all the rest of us, you know. I think we need to understand a couple of things. These are bright, enthusiastic people. They communicate differently, and as a result of that, their cultures are going to form differently. And how we model, you know, it was wonderful to see the app, but here's me. I tried to download it the other day on my Android when I got the email, and it's like lost somewhere behind about 8 screens, and so I'm back to the old stubby pencil and paper trying to figure out where the room is. But I could ask one of these guys, right? So they're very, very technology savvy, they're very tribal, and they're very smart. Let's take a look at this. If you don't think they're smart, take a look at this. Go ahead and start that video, please.
Camp Hideaway, and we're going to do some very special fishing. My friend Jake here has volunteered.
Fishing with the hair.
Fishing with the hair. Let's do it. We're looking good. Jake, you look a little nervous.
I feel 100% confident that I'm going to catch a fish.
Look at the teamwork involved here. This is awesome.
Go! Yes! 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 Trigger! Yes! Yes! Yes!
Now, I've been fishing for 45 years, and I never, ever thought of that, right? So don't think that everything's going to come from wisdom. You can't buy that kind of enthusiasm, can you? How many of you were hoping there was like a 15-pound blue catfish down there, man? I wanted to see that little bastard get sucked right off the dock. And if not, I want to find him and hire him, right? So this is the one image that's not a photograph. By the way, all these photographs are professionally done except for one at the very end, which I took. And I've selected them carefully, but I couldn't find one that was from 30,000 years ago. There's a whole bunch of animals here that roam North America. That's a saber-toothed tiger. Actually, there were about 9 different versions of saber-toothed cats. Actually more related to bears than cats, interesting. And that's a dire wolf down there. And over there is North American zebras. None of them who were able to adapt, right? They couldn't make it through the Ice Age. Now, having like 9-inch fangs is really good for taking down things like mastodons. Not so good for catching mice, right? So after the environment changed, they starved to death. Right? So we need to be able to change at the same time as our environment changes. We need to monitor our habitat, our economic habitat, our environmental habitat, our cultural habitat, all of those things. I looked hard to find an animal picture with an airplane in it, and I finally got one. What does this have to do with anything? You know what? We have overcome a lot of challenges by adapting to our habitat. I remember, and many of you probably remember, when if there was an accident, specifically a fixed wing accident, back in the 1970s, the cause was most likely wind shear. We learned about microbursts. We learned about Doppler. We created minimum reference ground speeds. We recognized the hazard. We set standards. We trained to the standards, and we haven't eliminated the hazard, but we have certainly adapted. And many, many more people are surviving now. The same thing with CRM. We recognized those authoritative captains were doing unsafe things, especially as they aged. And so we created a program to level that authority gradient, and that risk shrunk. Now fatigue, which, by the way, I don't think has as much to do with sleep as people argue. I think there's a whole bunch of wellness things involved. I think there's hydration, nutrition, exercise, aging, all of those things are involved in this whole fatigue equation, but I digress. What new threats are we adapting to or not adapting to today? Of course, the big one is technology. It will continue to outstrip our ability to adjust to it unless we really make that a central focus. Okay, 2 different animals here. On the left, you got a coyote. If you're west of the Mississippi, which we are, right, it's a coyote. East of the Mississippi, it's coyote. I don't understand those geographical differences. It's like if I shoot a 10-point buck in Michigan, it's only a 5-point buck in Colorado because you only count one side. How is that? Stupid. There was a time when Lewis and Clark first went through the American West, there were about 80 times more Timberwolves than coyotes. And now, while Timberwolves are making a comeback, and they're certainly still up here in Canada, there's coyotes everywhere, right? Why? What happened? Well, Timberwolves didn't adapt. And they made people mad, right? And so our great-grandfathers and grandfathers basically eliminated them. Now they have to have collars and federal protection to bring them back in. This is a coyote. I'm from out east, so I'll say coyote. Taken on the golf course in downtown Los Angeles. They're everywhere. They're everywhere. Wolves, not so much. Coyotes as a species learn to adapt. And that brings us to the whole issue of habitat. This used to be a forest dweller. Black-footed ferret learned to live in the desert, thriving in the desert, likes to eat prairie dogs. Didn't always. Found a way to change, to adapt. That is actually a very interesting animal there. That is a coyote with Timberwolf DNA. Coming down through Quebec and into the east coast of America, there is now hybrid coyotes. Coyotes usually weigh about 50 to 60 pounds. This one's about 100. Right? So they're growing. They don't run in packs. They're just faster, stronger. Right? Really interesting adaptation. I like to equate habitat with culture. What sort of habitat are we creating for that next generation of aviators? Is it one of compliance? Very soon, our selective processes that we have to make sure we get just the best people are the faucet's going to open up a little bit. It's going to be hard to find the right people. It's going to be hard to keep the right people. But the challenge is going to remain the same in how we shape those people, that cultural habitat that we put them in. Now I'm going to come to one of my favorite animals, and I told you I put this in last night after watching some ants. One of the things we have to realize that we can't ignore the small threats, okay? Because they tend to multiply. I think ants are fantastic to study because they've been around for hundreds of millions of years. Did you know that the ants, if you weighed them all, outnumber humans by about 3 to 1 in the world? At least that's what they tell me. There's something pretty cool about ants. First of all, there's only 5 types. Lots of different genus and species stuff, but there's only 5 basic functions. There's a scout. I got to come down here a little bit so I can see. That's actually a warrior, a fighter. There's the queen, of course, but then you've got scouts, carriers, cutters, warriors, and carriers. Did I say carriers? There's one more. But they all do one thing, and they do it extremely well. And you can tell by looking at them what their function is. And the way that ants work is they're so good at what they do that the scout will go, and if it finds food, it'll put down a little pheromone that says turn left. Everybody else that comes turns left and does their job, right? So scouts are really, really important. Redundant simplicity and integrated specialization is what makes an ant colony work. Okay? It's what makes an ant colony work. And it's also some of the basics of high reliability organizations. I know, I couldn't help that. I found that little gif. So how do you build that redundant simplicity? Well, first of all, you've got to have good standards and training, and you've got to have good quality assurance. And it doesn't matter whether it's old Joe or new Julie, the same standards have to apply. The second thing you have to do is you have to realize that continuous improvement is vitally important, okay? Because we tend to get bored, and that's where that cynicism comes in. And that's what derails a lot of our cultures. What about integrated specialization? Well, the whole quality and safety management system is built around this, but you've got to have employee engagement. You've got to have everybody participating. Imagine an ant colony without a scout. Imagine an ant colony without a carrier. Any one of those areas, and the whole colony breaks down. I think a lot of the same things are true about our safety management systems and our quality management systems. If we don't have everybody involved, it becomes just a safety officer thing or a quality manager thing. And he goes out, hey, why are you guys not reporting? I need more reports. Well, we need to explain it slightly differently. Now I'm going to start this, go ahead and start this video, I'll talk over it. This is something that if you've never seen is flat out bizarre. No, go back, is it not going to run? All right, so that's fine, we'll leave it there. This is something, you can find it on YouTube. Google up ant whirlpool. What happens is a scout goes wrong and everybody starts following him. The entire colony creates this whirlpool and they will stay there until they die of thirst or hunger. They'll all die there. All you have to do to fix it is kick one off into the grass and they'll start again. But it's fascinating, and it's one of those cultural aspects that if you have somebody out there that's a charismatic non-complier, your entire culture can follow them. Right? Sometimes I like to say, when I'm talking about change, that you have to find out who those people are. If there was an election for like CEO of your company or chief pilot of your company, instead of somebody appointing the right person, these people would win, right? So we have to understand the power of their influence. All right, I know you're thinking, hey man, he switched from zoology to botany. Not, I'm going to flip that leaf over. And on the back of it are some things called aphids. And one of the most ferocious predators in all of Mother Nature is the dauntless ladybug, who eats aphids. So if you got aphids, don't spray chemicals on them, get some ladybugs. We'll get rid of them. So what's this got to do with anything? The leaf allows the plant to grow. It's our experience. It nourishes the whole, right? But then we have these little predators that come in and begin to eat away at it. And you can always tell if aphids, by the way, live in the bottom of leaves. They don't want you to see them. But you can see that it gets almost transparent. And then you turn it over and there they are. So inconsequential errors, things that don't get reported, all of those things are aphids eating away at our performance, eating away at our safety management systems. We have to have ladybugs in our organization. We have to have that QA piece that goes after that stuff, because if not, we will not grow. And even single individuals out there that are saboteurs or cynical in your organization can really prevent that growth. Now here's a healthy tree, right? We start out with a desire to come into this aviation industry. We love it. It looks exciting. And then we get our training, and it's good training. Some of the best in the world out there, especially in the helicopter industry. And then we get experience. And when we get experience, that can be one of two things. It can support our training, or it can erode it. And when that experience becomes stagnant and the cynical folks begin to win the battle, we lose our ability to grow. Still got a tree, but it's not getting any bigger, and sooner or later when the wind comes, trouble. So Blue Threat Proverb 18, it used to be 17, I added one in front of it the other day, it confuses me. Grow or die, grow or die. Since I was coming to the Pacific Ocean, I had to bring this one up. This is something called the Immortal Jellyfish. Anybody ever hear of it? Okay. Now get this, true, look it up. They grow from a polyp to sexual maturity, then they mate, and they begin to grow younger, back to a polyp and do it all over again. How cool would that be? How cool would that be? Right? But it's a kind of a nice model to remind us that the passion that brought us into this industry, we need to continue to share, and we need to continue to share it internally. I mean, I often say that if I didn't get paid to do this, if I didn't have a company, I would do this anyway. And I mean that. Because I have a passion for it, because I've lost friends. I've knelt at their grave. And I've committed to this. Can we rediscover it? A couple more points. This is a photograph taken on the Bitterroot Valley back in 2001 by a Forest Service employee. Nature abhors imbalance. Okay? When things get out of balance, whether it's a ceiling fan or a forest, bad things happen. And the reason these raging wildfires are devastating the West is because we've been putting out fires since about 1930 and not letting nature take its path. We're not getting that regrowth, that regeneration. We've got 300 years in many cases, some forests that haven't burned in 300 years. Right behind my house, the last fire in my area, I've got 20 acres of a lot of fallen trees, happened in 1904, okay? Primed to burn. So how do we get that balance? This was out of the first book I ever wrote back in 1994 called Redefining Airmanship. And basically we have to understand that whether it's professional maintenance or professional airmanship, all of these things require us to balance our approach. We can't just be a great hands flyer or somebody that really understands the books but can't land in a crosswind, right? We have to develop our weak areas, which means we have to recognize our weak areas. Attitudinally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, all of those things, we have to be able to address them. When we kind of began to think of ourselves as above nature, and we evolved into an area where we believe ourselves supreme, our technology is over nature, we lost that intuitive awareness, that instinct that a lot of the natural world has. Interestingly, I was telling you about the mountain lion, long before I ever saw it walk up to my fence. My dogs were outside and the hair was up in the back of their neck and the wind was blowing away from us. They knew something was there. They sensed it intuitively. Don't know how, whether they picked it up visually or not. But we have to be able to remember where we came from. We have to be able to continue to evolve. I think about the stage of safety Neanderthals is where we're at. Not real smart about some of these areas if we don't want to be, and not real intuitive about them. And that's a bad combination, a very bad combination. This is something that we call the performance evolution ladder. And you can see that that first green box there called effectiveness is where you can earn a paycheck. Right? But good enough to earn a paycheck, not always good enough to survive. Okay? We have to continue to practice precision, picture perfection, because at times in our industry, and I saw a couple of hands go up earlier, 2 times in my career, both I got into situations that I shouldn't have got into, but once I was there, I had to do everything perfectly just to come home that day. We have to remember that. We live in a high-risk area, high-risk industry, and we've got to keep our fangs and talons really sharp for the day that we're going to need them. The day we're going to need them. This is a gear falcon. I saw one in my yard the other day, very rare down in the lower 48. Danger can come on us quickly, without a lot of notice. Look at the eyes on that thing. Predator's eyes up front, 3D vision, like a shark's eyes. Nature really doesn't care whether you are ready or not. There are lethal consequences for being unprepared. So how do we get started in all this? First of all, there's some organizational responsibilities and there's some personal responsibilities. Check for competence. Our training system is good. We need to make sure it stays good. I had somebody tell me the other day, you know, there are so many rules I could literally bust a pilot on every check ride. And so I asked myself a question, would I put my family on that airplane? And if I say yes, I pass him. And I said, you're killing me. We have standards for a reason. You're in the wrong job. We need to enforce those standards and check for competence. We need to train above the competency level. And as individuals, we need to be able to picture what it would look like if we had a perfect day, and we need to constantly strive for those things. So I'm going to wrap up here. I've pretty much stuck to the facts. I'm going to wander a bit here. So I do a lot of fishing, right? And I was up coming back from one of those lakes up at 11,000 feet in the backside of Mount Holy Cross, and I ran across this old-time fisherman walking down the path. And I stopped, and he shared a story with me. He says, you know, I was up there fishing, and threw my fly out, and all of a sudden I heard, over here. So I took my flask out, took a little drink, and thought I was hearing things. You know, threw my fly out, and I heard, over here. And I looked down. He said there was a frog, and it was talking to me. He said, I didn't know what to think. So I go, nobody is around. I said, what do you want? He says, I'm not really a frog. I'm a beautiful Native American princess, and I was put here 100 years ago by an evil wizard, and all you have to do is kiss me, and I will turn back into a beautiful Native American princess, and I will do anything you want, just kiss me, please. He looked down and took another drink out of his flask, and said, well, this is interesting. Then he reaches down and grabs her, puts her in his pocket. And she goes, what are you doing? What are you doing? I said I'd do anything for you. And he says, honey, at my age, I got more use for a talking frog. Right? There's a point to that. There's a point to it. And as I wrap up here, let me just hit the high points, and I thank you for laughing at that. It wasn't very funny. But learn to look with an enlightened eye. See the crocodile in the water. And that crocodile, the most camouflaged threat is probably you. Teach your pups to leave the porcupines alone. Right? Just because you can handle it with your wisdom and experience doesn't mean that they can. Stick together when threats emerge, as an organization, as a culture. Eat the aphids. Find some ladybugs to put in your quality assurance and safety manager shops. Seek the redundant simplicity of an ant colony. Don't pick a safety officer through line of sight, or somebody that just happened to be sick and so I made him the safety officer. Don't apologize for making a safety or quality guy. Hey, I need you to do this job. I'll get you out of it in a year. Right? Don't hit them in the head with a Nerf missile as they walk by. Don't put the guy who had the last accident. Put people in there that are courageous. Seek balance. You may be really mission focused and making a ton of money, and you're slowly letting safety erode. Learn to build and renew the passion that brought you into this industry. And remember, sometimes a talking frog is better than a native Indian princess. Know what you need. You know, one of the things about our industry, we chase fads a lot. Just because somebody else has a sexy thing that you think you need, look hard at your own organization. Know yourself. Be willing to admit the things that you need. And remember, nature doesn't care about your type rating, how many hours you have. Just doesn't care. It's fang and claw. You don't want to be one of these, and you definitely don't want to be one of these. So with that, I want to say thanks. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Mr. Decker.